some Christmas.
G'day guys, welcome back to another episode where we will be doing a full spoiler in-depth discussion on the latest addition to the Marvel Cinematic Universe on Disney+, that being the Hawkeye series. My name is Caleb, otherwise known as the Critic Kebab. For those who don't know, on this channel we do movie reviews, television discussions, gaming videos, all that type of stuff. So if you are new, come on this journey with us. Enjoy this conversation because I have also brought on my co-host Sam Eastgate to discuss it with me, and I'm eager to get into this discussion because we kind of lean on two opposite sides of our opinions on the Hawkeye series. You lean more positive, I lean more negative on the first season of Hawkeye, and I'm very eager to hear why you think the things that you do. And so let's get straight into it. Let's not waste any time. What was your initial thoughts on the series of Hawkeye, the introduction of Kate Bishop into the MCU?
I was very positive. I think I know a lot of people were looking forward to this a lot less than some of the other Marvel shows. Hawkeye being perhaps one of the less popular characters, being sort of out of the limelight in all the Avengers movies and having never seen the spotlight too much. And people weren't really sure what to expect from this show. But I was quite looking forward to it. I like Hawkeye as a character, and I think he's got a sort of unique role in the MCU, and you can do some stories that you can't really do with many of the other characters. As for the addition of Kate Bishop, played by Hailee Steinfeld, I thought
amazing.
She was an amazing.
So good.
She was a great addition.
Marvel has always done excellent casting, and she is yet another phenomenal addition to the MCU, I think.
Yeah, I remember when she was cast, we were both big fans, and very happy with that. And I think her chemistry with Jeremy Renner's Clint Barton was certainly one of the strongest aspects of the show, and something I really enjoyed watching throughout. And I thought was bodes well for the future, both any potential we see the two together in the future, and also seeing Kate Bishop bounce off other characters. We've seen her with Yelena, which was very fun. And I think
played by the amazing Florence Pugh. Yet again, another amazing addition.
Yeah, and I think both those two together, Clint and Kate, and as well as any potential team ups, I can see Kate Bishop being a very fun person to watch on screen with a variety of Marvel characters. So I'm glad that she's in the universe and looking forward to seeing where they go with her next.
Yeah, and even though I lean more towards the negative side of things with my overall opinions on the show, there are still some things that I really did like about it. The dynamic between Jeremy Renner and Hailee Steinfeld, I thought their chemistry really worked, and I think those two characters really shined together because obviously this series took inspiration, and there's a lot of adaptation from that origin story and that comic book that is so famous within the Marvel community.
The Matt Fraction run.
Yeah, exactly.
My Life as a Weapon, which I've read. I've read bits of just recently. Very good story, and you could definitely see the influences.
Exactly, and it's one of those stories where it's kind of a hero that is bringing a new hero into the limelight, and I feel like this show did a great job of kind of passing the torch from Clint, who is one of those superheroes in the MCU that has always kind of been on the out. You know what I mean? Like, especially since Age of Ultron, he's tried to put his past behind him, trying to move on with his life.
He's retired, 3 or 4 times now?
Too many times, right? And but now he's found someone that he can be like, okay, I can trust this person to be the new and better version of me, if you know what I mean. And I think that's kind of what this show aimed towards, and I think that they succeeded in accomplishing that mission of building a fun dynamic between those two characters. So I actually did like that apart in the show. But what disappointed me and what I walked away kind of frustrated with is that whilst they nailed the dynamic between those two characters, I feel like from a storytelling and a script perspective, they were still very undecisive of which story and which character to commit to, especially in the earlier episodes like 1 and 2. Because the story with Clint to begin with is he wants to spend Christmas with his family and all that. And the title of the show is Hawkeye, right? And we know that as Clint Barton. And yet I feel like the first part of the story was very much so focusing on the Kate Bishop origin. And as a result, in the editing and the rhythm, it just kind of felt disjointed and it didn't really know what it was committing to, because it was like, well, we're telling the story with Kate, which is really interesting. And then we're cutting back to the Clint wants to be with his family, and it's not as interesting. And it was like, yeah, just the indecisiveness of what story we're committing to here. And it's not until they really team up does the show become slightly more enjoyable, in my opinion.
I do see what you're saying. I like that, and I agree that certainly in those first 2 episodes, the 2 that were released as the premiere, I
don't think it was an accident that they did it that way, because I think they realized that in order to hook an audience, we need that extra bit to kind of latch them on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you think about the point that they're at the end of episode 2, which is the end of the premiere, with the Tracksuit Mafia, which, brilliant name by the way, pulled straight from the that Matt Fraction run. But I think it's more based on the fact that we've seen Hawkeye, we've seen Clint Barton before. He's been in the Marvel Universe. He first appeared in Thor in 2010, and he's been around for a while, so we know him. So we needed that time to introduce Kate Bishop, who is obviously brand new, and then connect her to Clint before they move forward as a pair. So we've seen all this story of Clint before, and we know where he's at the start of this, and we know his history, but we don't have any of that for Kate, which is why I feel like those first couple of episodes really focused on her and bringing her into contact with Clint, and then the show goes from there. But I do agree that I think it does take, those first 2 episodes do take their time in getting that going. For better or worse, I see what you're saying. It felt quite slow, but I didn't mind it too much. But I absolutely understand what you're saying there.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I was so engaged by the Kate Bishop origin story, and I really loved the opening where we are in 2012 and we're seeing her in that time that the Avengers movie is taking place, and we're seeing like a new perspective where it's like Kate is watching Hawkeye conduct himself in a really heroic way, and he really is just a super spy with these amazing archery abilities, but he's just an ordinary man with no superpowers.
With a stick and a string.
Yeah, and yet he's, working together with these heroes that are so, they're the Earth's mightiest heroes, right? And it's one of those things that always kind of makes him one of those heroes that's kind of made fun of, if you know what I mean, because he's very
easy to make fun of.
Yeah, exactly, because he is so different and so much more ordinary than the other Avengers characters, and but I think that's why he is so endearing, and that's what Joss Whedon did so well in Age of Ultron, was adding that family dynamic with him and making him really compelling from that perspective, because it was like he's a character that plays an integral, emotional, supportive role within this team-based environment, and seeing that then continue on into a mentor-peer type relationship with a young 22-year-old Kate Bishop, I thought was really interesting. And like we said before, I thought their dynamic that they played with it was really good. But one of the other things that quite disappointed me was this show is quite whimsical. It's definitely a bit more goofy than a lot of other Marvel stuff that we've seen. And I think it leans more kid-friendly than it does adult. And I understand that the Marvel brand is definitely appealing to people of all ages. But for me personally, I always prefer stories and content that is a bit more mature, if you know what I mean. And this is a personal take of mine. But those sort of whimsical stuff, it just didn't land for me. And that's not to say that I don't like whimsical stuff. Like, there's plenty of things that I do like that leans more into that kind of fantastical space. But for this show, it just felt kind of, there was just too many silly aspects. Like you mentioned the tracksuit mafia people, like this whole gang. They are really just a bunch of buffoons, if you know what I mean. And there's no sort of intimidation factor. And the thing that really kind of annoyed me was that this gang is being spearheaded by the one and only Wilson Fisk, Kingpin, played by Vincent D'Onofrio from the Netflix series Daredevil. And to see him come back was really awesome. And I think we're both in the same camp of we were so glad to see him back. But what frustrated me was that he was kind of brought into a show, or he was brought from a show that had a very serious tone, that was kind of very dramatic, into a show that was kind of silly, whimsical, and a much light-hearted tone. And to me, that was very jarring, and to me, it was very disappointing.
Yeah, I think that certainly the tonal shift between certainly Daredevil and Hawkeye is a massive shift. And I know going into it, what I built up, what I thought I wanted Hawkeye to be, was again more of that sort of grounded, slightly darker. Because I think that Hawkeye really works as that sort of character. He's not a high flying billionaire. He's not super patriotic. He's a spy. He's just an agent who's been through. By the time we meet him back in 2010, you get the impression that he's quite senior. So he's been through quite a bit. He's sort of that grizzled, older, not bitter, but more sort of grounded and
he's kind of a veteran, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, he is certainly a veteran in this game, really. But while the show that I was sort of thinking they would do, or perhaps hoping they would do, isn't what we got, I didn't mind the tone because I think it still told the same.
Well, it is a Christmas story at the end of the day.
Absolutely, and I think they still told the right sort of story, just in a different tone. That sort of grounded, mob, bit of sort of detective work in connecting all the dots with people like Jack, and her mum, and all this sort of almost crime background to the show. Really worked for Hawkeye. I think keeping it small scale I really liked.
Yes, yeah.
Particularly where the MCU's at the moment is a lot of cosmic big stuff. We've got the multiverse, we've got all these sort of
live
big
scale
things
stuff,
happening,
yeah, 100%.
Out in space and in different dimensions. So just having a story that's Hawkeye and a few mafia guys in New York was quite refreshing and proves that those stories can still work even with how big the MCU has gotten, which I think is an important thing to still have in the MCU moving forward, is being able to tell these sort of smaller stories, because they're very enjoyable, and they're still important for the characters, I think.
I agree with everything you're saying, and that for me I think is what kind of tips me over into this space of being like disappointed, because I felt like the lower stakes fit so well for like this Hawkeye story, but to me I just felt like everything that transpired was kind of inconsequential, if you know what I mean, because it just the way the Kate's mother kind of and that storyline gets wrapped up, it kind of just felt quite quick. The other thing was it was only 6 episodes, and by the time I was getting really engrossed into the story, it was over. And it was just one of those things, I felt there was so many aspects that they just rushed into it, and as a result it felt inconsequential by the end of it. And that's, to me, was disappointing, because I felt like if you stretched it out a little bit more and allowed more space to breathe, maybe added more into the mystery element, then it could have been a bit more satisfying. Because by the time, like, we literally get a Kingpin reveal at the end of episode 5, and then we have him defeated by the end of episode 6. Yeah. And it's one of those things, it's just like for a villain and a character that is so iconic as Vincent D'Onofrio's performance as Kingpin, you would expect so much more. And to me, as someone who loves that portrayal and thinks like that character is one of the best villains for television, I think he deserved better, in my opinion. I feel like the finale was kind of my tipping point, because if they stuck the landing, I think I would have leaned way into the camp of I really liked this show. But because the finale was such a jumbled mess of trying to balance all the different storylines that was going on, because we have the heroism of Clint as Hawkeye doing everything that he's doing, and then we have Kate trying to stop Yelena from killing Clint.
In a brilliant fight scene, I have to say.
Yeah.
That one shot through the corridor is so fun.
It was exciting, yeah. But then we also have the aspect of the father-in-law. What was his name again? I've forgotten. With the sword.
Jack DeCane.
Jack DeCane, that's it.
The swordsman.
We had him and his kind of like goofiness that he was going on with. And then we had the subplot with the mother who's gone missing. And then we have the other supporting characters from the
LARPers.
The LARPers, who were, part of that gang that kind of dressed up and played that sort of... Like, again, that played into a really whimsical aspect of this story. And then, obviously, we have all the mafia, and then we have the Kingpin stuff as well. There's just so much going on there. And the most important aspect that I feel they needed to nail, because they set this up at the end of Black Widow, was the relationship and the mission between Yelena and Clint. Because Yelena has this idea instilled in her head that Hawkeye is responsible for Natasha's death. And we, as the viewers, and Clint obviously knows that it was a sacrifice, and it was in a way a suicide in order to save the whole universe. And yet somehow the narrative has been warped in a way that Yelena thinks, oh, he was responsible and he needs to be taken out as a result of that. And to me personally, I was not enjoying that motivation, because I was like, well, clearly there's going to be an explanation and they're going to rectify it. And I think the way they executed that explanation in the finale just felt so lazy, and it just wasn't entertaining, in my opinion, because it was so structured in a way and edited in a way where it was like just so procedural, if you know what I mean. There was no sort of dramatic aspect to it, because you as the viewer know information that the Yelena, the character, doesn't know, and you're waiting for her to catch up to that point. And if a story is told in a really clever way, you will see the character jump from point A to point B, and it'll be really satisfying when they make that discovery. But in here, it was just Clint slowly revealing information to him in a really dumb, vague way. And whilst that's happening, there's a fight scene going on to try and keep it exciting. And at that same time, we're also intercutting between all the other fight scenes that's going on between Maya and her subordinate, and then also Kingpin and Kate. And to me, the finale just completely botched that aspect, because it was so important and integral to get that relationship established and that information across. And yet it felt so much like an afterthought, if you know what I mean. Did you get that sense at all? The craziness and the hecticness of the editing in the finale?
Not so maybe not in the way you're describing. I do think again they jammed too much into this final episode, and certainly, like you're saying, the sort of discovery of Yelena learning what happened could have been, if you gave it more time, I think it would have been really good. I think they just didn't have time.
Exactly, which is why I felt it was so chaotic in those last moments. It just became so disorientating to me, because I was watching the Yelena Clint stuff, and I'm like, oh, all right, I'm getting into this. And then they'd cut away, and I'm like, oh, I want to get back to that.
Yeah.
And then we'd have like a goofy action scene with Kate and Fisk, and it's just like, okay. Because at the same time, you also need to think, like, we're watching this being like, oh, okay, so what's different about this version of Kingpin? And what we do realize is that this isn't the same version that we see in the Netflix show, because this guy's way more juiced up.
Oh,
right?
He's big.
Yeah, so...
Took an arrow to the chest.
Yeah.
He's just throwing rips off a car door.
Way more, just like resilient to and impervious to damage. And so like we're also like dealing with all that as well. And to me it was annoying because we couldn't focus on any of the cool shit that they were introducing. And as a result, they were juggling so many balls. And as a result, instead of it being like a really nice, cool, satisfying juggle, it was kind of like they kept stumbling. And whilst most people, I would assume, because I think you said the consensus was that most people liked it, right?
A lot of people I've seen have been pleasantly surprised by how much.
Yeah, so I feel like for most people, maybe they didn't notice the stumbles. But for me personally, I was quite disorientated and disappointed that the fact they couldn't balance all the cool shit that they were trying to throw in there. Question for you. At the end of the finale, we obviously get that scene between Maya and Fisk, where the gunshot goes off. Is he dead? The show wants us to think that, but in typical movie television fashion, if you don't see a dead body, he isn't dead. So,
and even in superhero shows, even if you do see a dead body, doesn't necessarily mean they're dead.
Yeah, well, that's also true, right?
That's a whole other issue there.
Yes. But to me, honestly, like again, with seeing this character come back into the MCU official, it was disappointing that that's how they decided to leave the character, that it was an ambiguous exit potentially for this character.
I don't think he's dead.
Yeah, but
we've got Daredevil.
But why would you not set him up to be like an ominous threat for future stories, as opposed to let's pretend he's dead and wait for him to show up later? To me, it just felt kind of like he's back, but he's not really back, and to me that was disappointing. So,
it did feel like an odd choice.
Do you think he will return in some MCU story moving forward?
I think it would be a huge mistake not to. The amount of people who those shows are really, most of them
so beloved,
and people have been wanting, particularly Daredevil, who we got
Charlie Cox,
spoilers, and Kingpin have been the main two that people are like, we want these guys in the mainline MCU, particularly because Kingpin is such a big figure. He is the kingpin, the crime kingpin of New York, which is where so many Avengers things are. So he's a really big figure, both physically and metaphorically, in the Marvel universe. So I don't think they would bring that in, and people will love the fact that he's back. And it would be a complete waste to just bring him back for one episode.
Exactly.
Certainly, it's not flawless. But I think certainly some of the chemistry really carries a lot of it. And the emotion. I mean, while yes, I believe it wasn't as satisfying as it could have been to see Yelena reach that conclusion, just the moment of the two of them remembering that and coming to that realization that they both love this same person, and both felt awful, felt lost, and were feeling the grief of her death in slightly different ways, but that coming together, I think the emotion works really well, largely off the back of the performances. We know both Jeremy and Florence Pugh are brilliant actors, and really sort of carry that emotion. So I think that sort of makes that sort of elevates that past some of its shortcomings. Certainly doesn't erase them, but I think made that still very satisfying to watch, and really gave it some real weight.
Okay. I can understand that, but I just didn't feel that way.
As is your right, and I certainly see where you're coming from. Again, didn't develop it as far as they probably could have over enough time, and certainly I think I've seen it broken down into sort of the three plots of the finale. So you've got, particularly in that final battle. So the build up, I really enjoyed all the build up. Even having the LARPers at this fancy dinner, as the sort of as waiters or whatever.
I
they
did
were doing.
like when
that was
no one
enjoyable.
was listening to them when they were in their suits, and then they decide, all right, well, let's get dressed up to make us look like superheroes, and then that'll make people
And
listen
people
to us.
pay attention.
And it's just that was
Stand out and people pay attention.
Yeah, that was quite humorous.
The elevator conversation between Yelena and Kate was very funny. Again, I like their dynamic.
Their dynamic was really fun. And the scene with the macaroni and cheese and that back and forth was also really captivating.
That was great. And it's interesting in this because they're opposed, but they're not enemies. So they have that opportunity to have that sort of playful rivalry almost, because Yelena doesn't have any problem with Kate, but Kate's sort of in the way rather than...
all her resentment is directed towards Clint.
Absolutely. Even the stuff before that fight, that sort of... I really like that conversation when they're making the trick arrows, which I love the trick arrows in this show overall. We haven't seen too many of them from Clint that much in the past. We've seen a couple of grappling arrows and a few explosions.
Yeah, well, because I think it leans more into that whimsical kind of silly aspect, which is the kind of stuff that I don't like. But I understand it's there more so for that sort of, let's do something a bit different with Hawkeye. So I understand it. I just personally was like, it was more of a rolling of the eyes for a lot of it. In saying that, there was some cool aspects when he shoots the Pym arrow.
I was going to say...
the bus into like a little bus.
Yeah.
So like stuff like that was clever and really fun. But then there's just other stuff. It's just, it's just a bit silly.
Yeah, and it does lean, but the fact that it's been such a history in the comics and stuff.
Of course, yeah.
Like I said, I just recently read the Matt Fraction run, and even that bit of labeling them, I got a kick out of that moment when I see Kate printing off the labels, because that's a running joke in that comic, and I really like the vibe you get off Hawkeye. Generally, he's not a Black Widow with their slick fighting moves and whatever. He's just like a brawler with a bow.
And he's better at long distance. Like, it's like that line in The Avengers, right, where it says, he sees better from a distance. And as an archer, you want to have distance between you and your opponent. And when you get up close and personal, that's where he had issues with Yelena, right? When she first comes into the stories, she comes out of nowhere, and she's really good at hand-to-hand combat, and that's her strength as opposed to Clint's
She's probably better at the close-up stuff than he is. He's humanized so well in this show. At the end of every fight, you see them come in, both of them, with a few scratches, and it was something that I realized in the finale is this takes place over a very short time. Like, Kate's still got the same couple of cuts from the first fights.
Well, the story takes place over a week.
Yeah, so I think it's easy to forget that. And I was like, oh, damn. Like, these are just normal people. He's coming in from every fight with a stick and an ice pack on his neck, and he's got cuts and whatever. He's just a guy who just keeps... he can take hits. Like I said, he's a brawler, but he's a veteran. He can, work through these sort of things. Particularly with an Echo show.
Which I'm pretty sure Maya will be at the forefront, correct?
She's Echo, yep.
Yeah.
So,
well, my next question for you then is, what was your opinion on the introduction of this character, and what do you expect with her moving forward? Because me personally, there was nothing in this series for me to get invested or care about that character at all.
I think they both did too much and too little with this character. I think we got enough of her background and just that tease of, yes, Ronan killed her father, but Kingpin maybe, there's something more to it, which is a real good setup for her show. There's your starting point. She's realized this life that she's led, her uncle Kingpin, who she's trusted for all these years, maybe isn't as family as she thought, and there's something more to this. I did think it was slightly odd to give her such a large role in the finale. I think it would have made more sense to have her show up in those early episodes, maybe have that realization, maybe that confrontation with Ronan, and then for her to disappear to then be followed up in her own show, and then sort of have her come in as the, a stepping stone between the mafia goons and the Kingpin or some sort of like a mid-level villain. Then just give us enough that will take her out of the frame, because that makes sense for her to leave, to consider, it's a big revelation for her. And that would have been a perfect opportunity for her to step out of the story to then go and pursue her own show, and that's the point where you could bring in Kingpin as the escalation.
I personally just, if that's where they continue this story with those characters, like especially Kingpin, I don't care, and it's not my preference for where I would like to see the Kingpin story continue. I don't know. A mute character is really difficult to do in film because you have to rely on the silence and the subtitles and the sign language. It's really hard to make dramatic, and it's clear when they're doing it because occasionally the character will, instead of just doing the sign language, they will actually speak the words in order to make the scene somewhat dramatic. And I know from a filmmaking perspective, that's why you need to do these things, because in order to keep the scene engaging, you need to be able to verbalize things. And when it's just constant hand signals and subtitles, it's not as dramatic. And I feel like a show with her at the forefront might be tricky. And just me personally, I wasn't that engaged by the character and her story. So it's not something I'm excited for moving forward. And I thought her involvement in the story was underwhelming, to say the least. Do you think we will see a Hawkeye season 2? Where do you think the story with Kate Bishop and Clint continues next? Is it in Disney Plus or is it on the big screen, do you reckon?
I think Kate is going to be a long-term player, so we'll see her on the big screen in big team-up movies. I know there's a lot of talk of Young Avengers. I feel like we're not done with Clint Barton just yet.
Neither do I. I feel like he's still kicking around despite being on the retired path.
Several times.
I feel like there's still more for him to do. Me personally, I don't feel like we need it. I feel like Clint's one of the characters in the MCU that could easily retire and just spend the rest of his days happy with his family and his wife, who was former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. Very cool as well. But yeah, I don't think we need more with him. But like you said, I feel like there is more coming with him.
I think they've left it in an interesting spot in that for all this time he's kept trying to retire properly. But now he's got almost a halfway point. He can step back but still be involved as a mentor to Kate Bishop. So having that sort of, as opposed to just dropping it cold turkey, you have that sort of slow step down of responsibility, means that maybe it'll stick this time.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see like kind of a mentorship and like a guidance perspective where Kate's in the field doing the heroism, and then Clint's the guy in the chair, if you will.
Sort of embracing of the fact that she is going to be Hawkeye at some point in the future and he's not, when they're sort of brainstorming names.
Yeah, it was nice to see Clint kind of get a comic book superhero outfit, because he's one of those heroes that, because his job is so obviously covert, you don't want to be colourful and dressed up right. And to see him kind of lean into that because of the characters he's surrounded by, with Kate being like all about branding, and then the LARPers and stuff being all these colourful costumes and make believe. It was kind of end the holiday season in that sort of whimsical aspect. It made sense. It was kind of cool to see that.
But I did like this costume, the sort of simpler bit of purple, but it's basically almost his normal suit.
Yeah, it's a nice adaptation, I think.
Yeah.
A realistic adaptation.
Yeah.
Which is what the MCU has done so well, is they cherry-picked all the good stuff from the comics and translate it very well. And that's thanks to a great costume design team and a great production design team who are really clever and really care about the source material and want to translate it into the real world in meaningful and clever ways. So Sam, your final thoughts, overall thoughts on Hawkeye, the series on Disney Plus. Will it be a season 1? Will there be a season 2? We don't know yet, but just for now, what are your thoughts on Hawkeye overall?
Overall, I liked it. It was fun. We had great character dynamics, some great characters that are really enjoyable to watch, both in all kinds of different combinations. Introduced some great characters who will become key players in the future. A great Christmas series. I love the fact that Christmas was so integral. You can really tell it's a Christmas series. Action was great. It was some really fun fight scenes and chase scenes. I thought they really nailed a lot of that. Particularly that car chase and a lot of the final fight stuff on the ice rink. I really enjoyed. Some gaps in terms of characters with, maybe not enough time spent with characters like Yelena and Echo, but overall, just a really fun, very character-driven series that sets up a lot of good characters that we can see moving forward, and just a really enjoyable watch.
And that's what I think the MCU does so well, is that it's so character driven and it makes you care about these people in very meaningful ways. And that's why I think it's so successful, is that the story sometimes might not be the most engaging, but it's the characters that are always so profound, and what makes the people keep coming back, and why this franchise has been so long lasting is because the characters are so compelling. I guess my overall thoughts with Hawkeye are that it was a show that I was never super excited for, because Hawkeye's never been one of my favorite characters. However, the casting of Hailee Steinfeld I think was perfect. I think the dynamic between those two actors and those two characters worked really well. I think it was the highlight of the series for me.
Absolutely.
But for me personally, I thought the story itself was kind of unfocused at times. I think the scripting was occasionally quite lazy and rushed. And I think the kind of dramatic reveals and the climax of the finale was quite underwhelming. And the introduction of a hugely iconic villain such as Wilson Fisk, I thought was really exciting, and I'm glad to see him back. But I was disappointed with the end results that we got, and just the tone and stuff was just not personally for me. It's a show that was designed to be a fun Christmas adventure. That has a whimsical, light-hearted feel, and I think that's what they were aiming for, and that's what they accomplished. So those are our thoughts on the Hawkeye series that has just wrapped up in this holiday season for 2021, wrapping up a crazy, chaotic year for the Marvel schedule. So many movies, so many shows, but after the COVID pandemic and not having the ability to really watch any Marvel content, they've obviously got to catch up on their schedule, and they're just rapid firing it all at us. And as Marvel fans, we were obviously really excited to consume it all. And for the most part, I feel like it's been a huge success for Marvel overall. Would you agree?
I agree. I think there's certainly Disney Plus is here, and it's here to stay.
And it's just going to be so much more Marvel content coming our way.
And the movies are firing away. We are genuinely strapped in and full pelt at the moment.
But yeah, let us know your thoughts on the Hawkeye series down in the comments below. I would love to join in the conversation there as well. If you did enjoy our discussion here as well, make sure you smash that like button. And if you want to make sure you're not missing out on any future content that is similar to this, as well as my movie reviews, and of course my podcast as well, where we discuss this, that, and everything. Make sure you are subscribed, have the notification button turned on, all that good stuff. And thank you so much for watching, whether you are a loyal subscriber or someone new to the channel. I really appreciate you guys enjoying and sitting around and watching this content. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you in another video very soon.